there, I think. Let's see. Okay. Ciao. Okay, online. So we are online, we can talk. So welcome to our second webinar. We wanted to start by saying that we are really happy that we are able to organize these talks. And today we are really honored to have you here, to have directly from America, the Professor Donna Jo Napoli. We met the Professor Napoli in 2019 when she came to the University of Salzburg to give a conference and a course. And today she graciously accepted our invitation again. Professor Napoli is an American writer of children's and young adults book that have been also translated in many languages. And she's a prominent linguist and a professor at the Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. Today she will talk to us about movement and sign language lexicon, and we're very excited to hear the talk. After the talk, there will be 30 minutes for your questions, and you can put them in the chat. Don't be shy. Since we had a lot of different nationalities and native speakers watching last time, we wanted to tell you this time you can ask the question in English, of course, but you can also ask in German and we will translate. And since we are a very multinational team in the STV, you can also ask your questions in Italian, Dutch, Turkish, French. I think I forgot something. No? No. Okay, that's English and German, of course.
Maybe ASL?
Yeah.
Or lease?
That's the next thing I wanted to explain. We actually wanted to organize a translator, but since it was a bit short with the time, it didn't actually work that well. But we will keep the video on YouTube and we will add subtitles later. So if anyone wants to watch, and the automatically generated subtitles on YouTube aren't that great. So if you're watching this right now and watch via the automatic subtitles, you can have the opportunity to re-watch it in a few days and we will have proper subtitles added. Yeah.
Super. Okay.
So the stage is yours.
Okay, I begin. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I'm sorry that I cannot see your beautiful faces, but I will pretend like I do. I have a rich inner life. This talk is on ease of articulation and repercussions for the morphology, and I hope I will get to repercussions also for historical linguistics. The work that I'm presenting is not my work. It's work that I've done with Nathan Sanders, who is a professor at the University of Toronto. And the first part of it is work that the two of us did with Becky Wright as well. Okay, so first of all, what is ease of articulation? And I had planned on asking you all questions, but since I can't, I'm going to pretend like I've asked you a question and you've given me some answers, and we'll just kind of go like that. And you might say ease of articulation means reducing effort. Okay, what's effort? If I take my cup and I move it from one side of my desk to the other, I have used some effort. I have actually done some work. If you move something from one place to another, you've done some work. That's not the only kind of effort. If I take my hands and put them under my desk and I try very hard to lift my desk, which I hope you are trying to lift something else, the chances are that if it's heavy enough, you can't do it. You can't do any work, but you are still expending effort. That's isometric effort. There are all kinds of effort. When I take a needle and a thread, and I try to put that thread into the eye of the needle, I am expending effort. Yes, there is some movement there, so a biomechanical effort, but I'm also expending cognitive effort, coordinative effort, a bunch of effort. So let's go on and take a look primarily at biomechanical effort right now. Okay, so I'm going to show you some signs and some variations on signs in American Sign Language. And I'm going to ask you why one sign is less effortful. It takes less effort to articulate it than the other sign. So, for example, this is a sign for ugly in American Sign Language. But this is also a sign for ugly in American Sign Language. And today, this sign is much more commonly used than this sign. And you ask yourself, is one more less effortful than the other? And certainly using only one hand as opposed to two is less effortful. That's called weak drop. Why is it called weak drop? We talk about a strong hand and a weak hand. Your strong hand is your dominant hand. Most signers will have a dominant hand, just like most speaking people have a dominant hand. That's the hand that you write with. But signers are also very used to using both hands in signing. And when necessary, if you've got a baby on your right hip, you will sign with your left hand very, very well. But your non-dominant hand is called your weak hand. And you generally, when you're doing a two-handed sign with one hand, you drop the weak hand. Okay, here's another two variations on a sign. So this is the sign for interpret. I'm using examples from American Sign Language. And this is the sign for interpret. Let me do them again. And you should try to do signs as I do them. So this is the sign for interpret. And this is the sign for interpret. So both of them are two-handed. But over here, both hands are moving. And over here, the non-dominant hand, the weak hand, is frozen, while the dominant hand is the one that moves. That's called weak freeze. So it's a little more effort than just a one-handed sign, but it's less effort than two hands both moving. Another way to reduce effort is this. Okay, so this is a sign for cook. But you'll often see this. Okay, so here your hand has moved all the way over to hit the non-dominant hand. Here, your hand just points at the non-dominant hand. You don't move it all the way. That's called undershooting, undershooting for location. And here's another one. Okay, this is a sign for maybe. And this is the sign for maybe. Okay, maybe. And maybe. So you've just reduced the number of iterations. These are pretty obvious examples of reduction of effort. Okay, now I want to talk about your joints. So I have a shirt on that allows you to see my arms, and I want you to do what I do with your arms, okay? So think about your shoulder here and ask yourself what your shoulder can do. Move your arm, whatever arm, either arm, every way that you can move it, okay? So you can move it forward, you can move it up, you can move it to the side, you can move it to the other side, you can move it down, you can move it back. You have a great range of motion. You can also just hang it and move it. Try just hanging it and not moving it through space, but just in space, okay? You can rotate your arm. Your shoulder joint is fabulous. It's the most wonderful joint of your body. It has enormous freedom of movement. If you really want to get your hand to a particular location, almost assuredly, you are going to engage your articulation of your shoulder joint because your shoulder joint has this great freedom of movement. All right, now you get down to the next joint down on your, these are your manual articulators. You get to your next joint down, and what can your elbow do? Pretty much only extend or flex. Your elbow joint is your stupidest joint. It is nothing but a hinge. It's pretty boring, but there it is, okay? Then between your elbow and your wrist, you have what's called a joint, and I don't understand why it's called a joint, but it is. It's two bones that can twist around each other. So you can go like that with your arm. That is, I'm not moving my shoulder, I'm not moving my elbow, I'm just moving my forearm. People often say this is a wrist twist, but it's not your wrist that's moving, that's articulating. Your wrist is not articulating at all. It's the entire forearm that is doing a rotation there. That's the only kind of move that this joint can do. It's called your radio-ulnar joint. Again, it doesn't seem like a joint, but that's what we call it. Okay, then you get down to your wrist. Your wrist is actually just a hinge, just like your elbow is. But unlike your elbow, your wrist has some pretty phenomenally wonderful muscles on either side that allow you to move from side to side. And the combination of these muscles plus your hinge of your wrist allows you to actually even make a circle with your wrist. And, you know, try to do that so that you're convinced that your shoulder's not moving, your elbow's not moving. It's only your radio-ulnar is not moving. It's only the wrist that's moving. So your wrist is pretty wonderful, but not so much because of the joint. The joint is very boring, but the muscles on either side help it. Then you get to the hand. All right, you've got these base knuckles, and your base knuckles are like your elbow and your wrist. They're just hinges. They can just go like that. However, because of the beautiful muscles around them, your thumb can do a rotation. It's not because of the joint, it's the combination of the joint and the muscles. Many people have nice rotation of their index finger. It's a lot harder to move your middle finger, especially if you really try not to move your ring finger as you're doing it. The ring finger moving alone is really hard. Your pinky's pretty free again, but it's mainly your thumb and your index finger that have that interesting muscular ability. Then you've got what are called the interphalangeal muscles, joints, sorry, and they are hinges again. And they don't do anything except hinge, just like your elbow. There's nothing special they can do. We don't talk about these last joints that are on these digits, but not on your thumb, because go ahead and flex your interphalangeal. When you do, you tend to also flex these last ones. In fact, it's pretty hard for most of us to flex just one without the other. And it's very hard for most of us to flex just the tip one. You can train yourself to do it. And it may be useful to you in playing certain kinds of instruments, perhaps, but it's not the ordinary thing. And ordinary joint articulation is what languages are going to take advantage of. They are not going to take advantage of things that take extraordinary abilities or training, because language belongs to everyone. You want your youngest members of society to your oldest members of society to be able to participate. You want people of all kinds of abilities to be able to participate. Okay, so now we've talked about these joints. I want you to tell me what is the difference between two variants of the signs I'm going to put in front of you, or I'm going to pretend like you're going to tell me, in terms of joint articulation. And remember, I'm not talking about what joint has moved, but what joint has articulated. If I'm like this and I go like that, what joint has articulated? Certainly, the elbow has moved to the side, but the elbow didn't articulate at all. All the elbow can do is that. What has made us move exactly is our shoulder joint. Our shoulder joint is the only joint that's involved here in terms of articulation. So that's what I'm asking you. What joints have articulated? All right, so this is a little bit hard to see, so I'll try to exaggerate it. Here's one version of the sign remind, okay? Remind. I'm taking my thumb, putting it on my forehead, and I'm going like that, remind. Here's another version. Okay, so here and here. Can you see the difference? It's maybe slight. With this, the arm has gone up a little, so your shoulder's involved. And but even without your shoulder involved, let's not involve the shoulder. Do the radial ulnar and the wrist, okay? Whereas over here, you can just do the wrist. Just do the wrist. You don't have to do the radial ulnar. You can just do the wrist. So one has radial ulnar and wrist, and the other just has wrist. So freezing a joint is a way of saving effort. That is, every joint you use, if you articulate fewer joints, you're using less effort, and it can be a lot less effort. Your shoulder, when it moves, is moving this entire mass. Your arm is heavy. It's a lot of mass to move. If you don't engage the shoulder joint, and you're only engaging from the elbow down, you've got a lot less weight that you're moving around. If you're only engaging, and of course the elbow is involved in lift, and it's moving your whole radial ulnar, your whole forearm. Your radial ulnar moves the whole forearm, but only in place. It doesn't lift. So it takes less effort to use the radial ulnar than to use the elbow. Your wrist is moving only your hand. It's not moving your forearm. It's not moving your whole arm. So your wrist takes less effort than your radial ulnar, which takes less effort than your elbow, which takes less effort than your shoulder. And with the finger ones, we're only moving fingers or parts of the fingers. So as you go down the arm, as you get more distal from your torso, okay, we talk about distal and proximal. As you get more distal from your torso, you're using, if you're articulating that joint, you're using less effort. Here's another example. Okay, so here's the sign bottom. Okay, I start from here and I go like that. Okay, here's another sign bottom. Okay, so here I started with one hand. The wrists are, one's really quite a bit lower than the other. So when the hand goes up, the shoulder also lifts the whole arm up. And over here, just the wrist moved. And both of them are the sign bottom. But this one that just moves the wrist, that just articulates the wrist, takes a lot less effort than this one that lifts the arm and does the wrist. Here's another one. This, okay, so I'm shaking my arms at the elbows and I'm shaking my wrists. That's the sign for hurry. But you can also see hurry like this. Okay, so you keep your wrists stiff, but you're shaking at the elbows. It's less effort because in all of these, we've frozen. We had 2 joints or maybe 3 joints that were active, and we've frozen 1 or 2 of them, and only 1 is articulating. It takes less effort. So I just want to show you my screen 1 second. I hope I can share it and not make a mess and be able to come back. Share. Screen. Screen 2. Share. Okay. All right. You can see my screen now? Yes? Yeah. Okay, so you can see this is just a picture of the inside of the arm, and that's what we've been talking about all along. And you can see that we were talking about freezing different joints, but we've also talked about the fact that the higher the joint that you freeze, the less the way you're really cutting down on a lot of on effort. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and I don't want to share anything anymore. Am I back to you? Yes. Okay, good. Sorry about this. All right. So now freezing a joint is not the only way that you can reduce effort. Here's another way that's really cool. So this is the sign for attention. Okay, what joint has moved? Just the elbow. Okay, the elbow has articulated. Okay, and this is also the sign for attention. So instead of articulating the elbow, we're articulating the wrist, which means that we're using less effort, because here we were moving the whole forearm, and here we were moving only the hands. Here's another one. This is one sign for warn. You know, I'm warning you. Your wrist is articulating. And here's another sign for warning. I'm warning you. Okay, you're just articulating the base knuckles. So the one with the base knuckles is less effort than the other one. Here's one where you can see variants that that move all sorts of different things. So this is a sign for red. Okay, and I'm moving my shoulder. This is a sign for red. I'm moving my shoulder. This is a sign for red. I'm moving my wrist. And this is a sign for red. I'm moving only my interphalangeal. So you can do what's called migration of the joint that articulates, and those migrations were called distalization, because instead of using the wrist, the elbow, we used the wrist. Instead of using the wrist, we used the base knuckles. With red, I showed you it with the shoulder, with the elbow, with the wrist, with the interphalangeals. And this is actually the most common today, just the interphalangeal, because it's the least effort. Okay, and we expect that distalization might be the most common kind of migration of a joint that's used. We expect that it might be even more common than freezing. But in fact, it's a little bit less common than freezing in the study that we have done. And it's only slightly more common than proximalization, which is using a higher joint. Yeah. So why would that be? So let me show you some examples of proximalization. And I want you to think about why you might have done it. Okay, so this, everybody try to do it. You've got one hand here and the other hand has just the index finger standing up. And then rotate that index finger around there. It looks sort of like a clock, right? And that's a sign for hour, H-O-U-R. All right, so when I go like that, my elbow articulates because my arm goes forward and back. My radial ulnar articulates and my wrist articulates, okay? 1, 2, 3 joints articulate. But today, you're more likely to see that, okay? So that. It doesn't look as much like a clock anymore, but the hour has gone all the way around. And you're using, again, your elbow because you open up to go around, but you're using your shoulder to go up and down. So you have used a more proximal joint than and given up your radial ulnar and your wrist. And why might you do that? Try it. Just try to do hour 3 times that way and try to do hour 3 times that way. And if you think about it, this one's pretty awkward. It's just not that comfortable. This one's quite comfortable. So it could be that just articulatory comfort is at stake. Why else might you proximalize? So here, that sign for worn. Sometimes you'll see people doing that, worn, and they're using their shoulder. It's up and down of the whole arm for worn. Why might you do that? People often do it when they're warning children. And sometimes they do it as shouting. Using the shoulder allows your sign to be a lot larger because your whole arm is moving. It's more noticeable. It's like shouting. All right. What else? All right. So this is the sign for cat, one sign for cat. And this is a sign for cat. And this is proximalizing because you're using your shoulder. This is just your wrist. And you'll see a number of people doing this who, often children, first language acquisition, you get control of your large parts before you get control of your smaller parts. So that's one thing. Another thing is second language learners. When people come to learn ASL, any sign language as a second language, they often will do things larger. And that's typical of doing many types of physical activities. So in skiing, when you first don't know how to ski very well, people use their hips a lot more than they do when they've learned how to ski better. They will use their knees and their ankles more as they learn to ski better. And in writing, when children first learn to write, their whole arm will be going. But as they get better at it, it will be the from the elbow down that they use. And then sometimes, sometimes we get proximalizations and we don't know why. For example, this is the sign for elbow and you're just using your wrist, but sometimes people will use their whole elbow in doing it. Why they moved up, I don't know. Another thing, okay, so yeah, this is a sign for inspire. It's your hands are in O's and they open to 5, and you're using really pretty much your elbows, but you'll see some people doing this. Why do they do it? I don't know. It could be it's, again, shouting, but maybe not. So whatever, ease of articulation is responsible for variation in language. When you've got variation in language synchronically, that can lead to diachronic change. So I just want you to remember that. Now, there are other things that lead to diachronic change. So this, okay, everybody try it. You've twisted your first 2 fingers and move them. I'm moving them to the right because my right side is my dominant side. This used to be the sign for ready. Today, this is the sign for ready. You just shake your hands, okay? And in the old days, yes, when I first learned anything about signing in the old days, this was the sign for tape recorder. Today, I don't know if you even know what a tape recorder is. But if you do talk about a tape recorder today, this is a sign for it. And if this were a tape recorder, the tape would snap immediately. You know, it's not a good sign iconically. Okay, so you look at it and you ask yourself, why did that happen? Why did this change to that, or shaking it? Why did this change to that? And one thing you might notice about it is that you've got symmetry, okay? Your body, if you split it lengthwise, that is mid-sagittally, your 2 halves are largely reflexive images of each other, mirror images of each other. And when you do ready that way, you're not symmetrical across this mid-sagittal plane. But if you do ready that way, you're symmetrical across the plane. If you do tape recorder that way, it's not symmetrical. If you do it that way, it is symmetrical. Now, is the move to reflexive symmetry due to the drive for ease of articulation? Does it reduce effort? And I want to convince you that it does. So take your 2 hands with your fingers like this. Put your fingers on your desk or on some hard thing. And now I want you to pretend like these are legs, okay? And let your and these are 2 people. And let your right leg go forward, and then your left leg goes forward. And you're walking along, right leg and left leg. So these people are walking along with each other. Now I want you to plant your 2 people side by side. And when I tell you to go, but not till I say go, I want you to have these 2 people start out on their right foot, both of them, just like you were doing, but I want you to have them run. And when I say stop, I want you to totally freeze, okay? Go. Stop. Okay, now look at your hands. Are you still in that position, or have you lined up to become reflexively symmetrical? And most people will have lined up. And maybe if you didn't line up, I didn't give you long enough. I maybe should have given you another second before I said stop. We have an urge to have bimanual coordination that is reflexively symmetrical. It's your brain is giving the same message to both hands if they are reflexively symmetrical, whereas it has to give different messages to the hands. The message being go toward the center or go away, as opposed to one of you go away and the other go toward the center. So it's a kind of cognitive effort, but it's an effort. And but that's not the full story. There's more things going on. So take your hands and just go like that. That's a sign for road. Take your hands and go like that. That's a sign for lift. Take your hands and go like that. That's a sign for little. Okay. They differ because road is moving along away from your body. It's moving on this away toward kind of axis. Lift is moving on an up down axis. Little is moving on a sideways axis. Okay, we've got these three cardinal directions. 1, 2, 3. We've got three cardinal directions going on, and we play with signs, with movement on those signs, where they can be in and out. Whoops, of phase. Okay, sorry. So, for example, we've got road, but we also have explain or describe. Okay, with it, my hand is shaped like that. Okay, so here, as one hand goes forward, the other comes back, and you just reverse. That's called out of phase. It's also called alternating. It may be called other things too. Okay, with lift, both hands did the same thing, but with maybe, as we already saw, one goes up while the other comes down, out of phase. With little, both hands are doing the same thing in terms of they're coming toward the center. But with, yeah, whoops. Let's see. I maybe I don't have one that that is like that, where one. Oh, okay. So actually, the old ready would be out of phase in terms of one goes toward the middle and the other goes away, and then they reverse what they're doing. Whereas little is they're both doing the same. Okay, now, now I want to explain one more thing to you. There isn't much time. Okay. We are made of mass, all right? And we have a center of mass. And every person's center of mass is a little bit different. Women tend to have more of their weight lower in their body, so they have a lower center of mass. Men have their weight more in the upper part of their body, so they have a higher center of mass. And your the way that you move affects your center of mass. So, for example, if you try standing up and you lift your right arm, and you only lift your right arm, you have changed your center of mass. Wherever your center of mass was, it is now a little bit more to the right. And your center of mass can destabilize. Let me see what I'm doing here. It can destabilize your entire body by moving different things. So, for example, if I move only one arm, if I do it fast enough, I may destabilize myself. If I want to keep it steady, I'll move both arms. If I move both arms, then I'm not changing my center of gravity, my center of mass at all. It takes when something pushes or pulls on you, it's called a force. And the tendency to force, force can have a tendency to make you rotate around an axis. Some forces can. And that's called torque. I want to read this so I'm not saying anything wrong. The moment of inertia of a rigid object is that property that determines the torque needed for a rotational acceleration. The greater the moment of inertia around a given axis an object has, the more torque that will be required to start, increase, decrease, or stop rotation around that axis. Let's see what that means. So example, take your right arm and fling it leftward, okay? And if you're willing, let yourself go with it. And you'll find that your right arm, as you throw it, that force is, it's like you have an axis up and down through your body. We are shaped like, sort of like cylinders. And if we have a force going like that, we can start spinning around that axis. That's called torque. All right. Now, let's say that you take both arms this time and fling them forward. Okay. Just really fling them forward. And you'll find that you might rock backward. You don't have as much of a tendency to do any kind of rotation because you're connected to the floor. And your body is also distributed with your mass along this axis, not along this axis. We tend to be taller than we are wide. So even though there is like an axis going through our body here, if we get a lot of force pushing us that way, we're still not going to roll around it, but we can rock. If you take your right arm and just fling it to the right, try flinging your arm to the right, you'll start to keep your feet in place. You'll start to go that way. And it's like there's an axis going through your body front to back, and you could rotate around it if you were shaped differently and if your feet didn't have to be connected to the ground. So we have all these different torques going on us, and I'm now going to share my screen with you to make sure that I don't say anything wrong. And because this is relatively technical stuff. Okay, can you see my screen? All right, yes? Okay, so here we have a cylinder. The human body is sort of like a cylinder. And the torque needed to rotate an object with these kinds of dimensions are to rotate it around this vertical axis is less than the torque needed to rotate it around other axes. Yeah, it's like you can easily spin it. If you think about it, if you took a log and you had an axis, if you took yourself and you flung your arms around as we were doing, you could easily spin. But it's like if you take a log and put it on the ground and you kick it, it will roll that way. But if you put it lengthwise on the ground and you kick it, it's not going to roll end over end. It's much harder to get that kind of torque going on. Okay, so, whoops, can I not? Yeah. Okay, so here. So this is just a mathematical proof of the fact that it takes less torque to get a cylinder like a human body spinning around the vertical axis than around the a horizontal axis or a front back axis. These are the two moments of inertia, where here is inertia for twisting around the vertical axis. We're going to call it twisting. Is your mass times your radius squared, your radius of the radius of the cylinder that you are, over 2. Whereas the inertia for rocking either sideways or forward and back is your mass times 3 times your radius squared plus 4 times your height squared, the height of the cylinder, divided by 12. And here's just a proof. And if you want, you can look at it later, but it's good. So I think I'm gonna stop sharing. Let me make sure what is the next one. Oops, why? Whoops, okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing again. Sorry, I'm so slow at this. Okay, are we back? Good. Okay, so now, when you are in a conversation with someone, you do not want to wind up spinning around. It's not cool. It's going to mess up your conversation. And especially in signing, it messes you up because signers like to keep eye contact. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. That's what human beings do. In tests of all kinds of primates, including human beings, but also including bonobos, which is our closest relative, we find that if an infant is in its mother's arms and the mother turns her head to look at something, the infant turns their head to look at it. But if the mother just changes her gaze to look at it, the infant does not, except with humans. And if you look at the eye of primates, you'll see that in a gorilla, in a bonobo, there's hardly any sclera. You can't see the white. But in human beings, we have quite a lot of white, which makes it very easy to see where our gaze has gone. Human beings developed in order to have eye communication. And you might ask, why? Why would we need eye communication? And there's a good reason for it. When you open your eyes, you see more of the sclera. If you open your eyes very wide, your iris doesn't change size, but you see more of the sclera. We have the greatest aperture when we are feeling fear or anger. And fear is a very important thing to be able to communicate to someone else, because if you're afraid, maybe they should be afraid too, and we should all get out of here. Anger is also a very important thing to communicate to them, because then maybe they won't cross you, or maybe they'll run away, whatever. So these are really important things, whereas when you're generally happy and enjoying things, you don't change your aperture that much. These are nice things to feel, but they aren't necessarily something that you really want to communicate to someone else. Yeah, so torque is going to make it very hard to manage keeping our signs in sight. Okay, so now if you look at signs that move only along one axis, this axis, this axis, or this axis, okay? Only along one of them. We have 2 types that move along each of them. That is, your hands move together or your hands move out of phase, all right? And if you look at going forward and back, this moves you, it starts into a rocking tort, okay? Or it could. This starts into a rocking tort as well as a twisting tort. Oh, maybe not into a rocking tort, because as this one goes forward, this one comes back. So maybe not into a rocking tort, but certainly into a twisting tort. Up, down, just going up has no torque involved in it. It changes your center of mass, but it doesn't throw you off of your axis. But this can lead to swaying, okay? When you go to something like this, this is really going to get you twisting. Yeah, it's super going to get you twisting. Your center of mass is changing, as well as you've got torque. But if you go like that, or if you go like that, your center of mass is not changing, and there's no torque. So there are 6 different kinds of monoaxial signs, and we can make a prediction that the ones that involve torque of any kind are destabilizing, and the ones that involve no torque are not destabilizing. And it's going to take you more effort to resist torque on the ones that are destabilizing. So those signs, because you're not going to want to move. If you're going to go like that, you're going to want just your hands to move, not your torso, not your, that you want to resist that. So there's a new kind of effort involved here, an effort that is resisting moving something. It's an isometric effort, but it's there. And you're resisting moving, but you don't have to resist anything for that. And what we did was we looked at 3 languages. We looked at LIS, which is Italian Sign Language. We looked at Sri Lankan Sign Language, and we looked at also Al Said Bedouin Sign Language. 3 languages that are not genetically related to each other, that so far as we know have had no contact with each other. And we found that when you look at we looked at whole dictionaries in these languages. The Italian dictionary was the largest one we had. The other dictionaries, some of them were, one of them was very small, but we found the following. So I'm going to share with you. And I realize that I'm really pushing it on time. I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, yeah. Whoops. Okay. All right. So if you look here, the blue bar is the stable signs, the signs that don't induce torque of any kind. The red are the destabilizing signs. And you can see that there are many more stable signs in Italian Sign Language than there are destabilizing signs in Italian Sign Language. What those little gray boxes mean, they're just to show you what we would expect if we had a random distribution across the 6 kinds of signs. And we have about double the number of stable signs than we would have expected, just randomly giving you all 6 kinds. And we have many fewer destabilizing signs than we would have expected. And pretty much the same thing happens. Let me get up there. For Sri Lankan, this is a picture of Sri Lankan, and for Al Said Bedouin. Okay, so it's really pretty cool. And if you lay them out, this is for Italian Sign Language. These are the 6 different kinds. The blue on the right is signs like this, okay? where your center of mass doesn't change and there's no torque going on. The shorter blue is for signs like this, where your center of mass does change, but there's no torque going on. The smallest one is where you've got this, where your center of mass changes and you've got twisting torque. Okay, so, and the others are different kinds of torque. I'm running out of time. And we find for Italian Sign Language, which I showed you first, it worked out just beautifully. For Sri Lankan and Al Said, it isn't nearly as beautiful, but they were much smaller dictionaries, so we don't really know. But we can still see that the stable signs are much more represented in the lexicon than the destable. Stabilized signs. And when you look at all three languages together, we can see that it's pretty much a similar picture. Okay, now I can't go into multi-axial signs, so we're not going to worry about that. We're just not going to worry about any of those things, but I want to show you some beautiful stuff just because you have to see something beautiful. So I want to show you that when people talk about how do you do historical linguistics for sign languages, there's a lot of things that are available in doing spoken language historical research are not available in doing sign language historical research. We don't have video recordings of sign languages until the 1900s. And we don't have descriptions of people signing, except just little tiny mentions here and there. Whereas with spoken language, we have so much. So we don't have that. Further, we have the complication that deaf people are often separated here and there. You know, you might have one deaf person in this community and there's no deaf person till the third community over there. So we don't have large deaf communities around, and until we bring people together into schools for the deaf and we set up some sort of governmental policy toward how to raise and educate deaf children. And then we find when people set up their schools, what they'll do is they'll come knocking on the door of some country that already has a school, and they'll say, come help us. That has happened when America set up its sign language. They brought over people from France because France was the first country to set up any kind of a school for the deaf in which they brought deaf people together. And so French Sign Language influenced American Sign Language, which drew on local sign languages, and then added this French overlay. Many sign languages around the world have a ton in common with American Sign Language, not because they're at all related, but because, well, they're not genetically related, but because they brought over teachers from like Gallaudet University to help set up their schools. And so this complicates things, what's going on. Another thing is people can't agree on what we should compare when we're comparing to signs. You know, in a spoken language, if you've got the sign for, if you've got the word tree and you've got the word albero, like in Italian, they don't sound anything alike. You can be pretty sure that these two words are not genetically related to each other. But if you've got cat in English and you've got Katz, what is it in German?
Katze.
Katze, okay, Katze. They sound a lot alike, and so we go from the presumption that either there was contact here or they came from the same sources. But in sign languages, you can get so many things are iconic that two different countries might have made up a very similar, if not identical sign for something, and it's not because they're genetically related. So this is a sign for book in sign language after sign language. And, it's just, so how do you know what's when two sign languages are related? Okay, so I think what you do, one way of doing it is to do it purely on an articulatory basis. And when you do that articulatory basis, you want to look for signs that have maybe, okay, you've got the location of a sign, your hand shape, the movement, and the orientation of the hands. You've got all these things. If you've got at least 3 of them that are the same, we tend to think they're genetically related. But the thing is that movement is a really complicated parameter. There are many parts of movement. There's the size of the movement, there's the shape of the path, there's where you began and where you ended, there's a direction of the movement on the path. There's so many things. And how do you know? We think we'd have to look at movement in a more nuanced way. And ease of articulation can help us do that. So here are some nice ones. If you look at attention in American Sign Language, and you look at attention in Italian Sign Language, you can see it's weak drop. If you look at weak freeze, now this is a little bit more complicated, because what we're going to look at is in Brazilian Sign Language, which is Lise, she did that, okay? 2 hands, and their V's. Now look at this sign in Austrian Sign Language, which is not the sign for attention. It's the sign for watch. Oh, whoops. Sorry about that. The sign for watch. Okay. Now, why do I say watch? Okay, let's go down to attention in okay, so oops, okay. So attention was this. Attention is different from this attention, but don't pay attention to just the hand shape. If you look at the movement, it's very similar movement. It's just off to one side. And if you had the same hand shape and you were going off to one side, but you froze one hand and you went like that, you'd wind up with what she does in watch. Look at it again. See? It's like the weak hand is frozen and the right hand was, the strong hand was the one that moved. Here's another example of weak hand freeze and attention in Czech Sign Language. But here, the weak hand has changed from being in the old hand shape to being what's called an unmarked hand shape. Yeah, there's so many things. Okay, then you remember that American Sign Language attention was that with iteration. This is Indian Sign Language, and she doesn't do any iteration. She's got a difference in the shape of the movement, but okay. Now, here, cool things can happen. So if you look at attention in Ukrainian Sign Language, okay, so she goes like this, okay, okay, both hands are moving forward. And if you look at it in Russian Sign Language, one hand has dropped. If you look at it in Lithuanian Sign Language, one hand has dropped, and she's made a compound out of it. She's got a second part to it. Okay, so just hand-wise, both Russia and Lithuania have dropped the hand, but also look at migration. So in Ukraine, it's the elbows that are moving. In Russia, Oops. Oh, okay, wait. I didn't want that. I want Russia next if I can. Russia, go Russia. Let me, okay. So instead of the wrist moving, the elbow moving, it's just the wrist moving. So we've had a distalization. And if you look in Lithuanian, she did a radial ulnar, yeah, kind of thing. And then she had her second movement. Yeah. So, here's a sign for mutual. If you look in Czech, mutual, she's just going straight and pretty much straight forward and back, which is pretty much inducing torque. But if you look at Romanian, he's lifted it a little bit. As you add on more axes, so you've got an axis going forward as well as an axis going up. As you add on more axes, it reduces torque, which I didn't explain to you, but you could sort of believe me. If you look at Portugal on mutual, he's found another way to reduce the torque. He added a different axis. And in Sweden, she's done the same thing, but she's then joined her hands. Okay, and I just want to show you Italy versus the United States on the sign for mutual. So in Italy, you've got your elbows are moving, your radial, let's see, your shoulder is moving, your elbows are moving, and your wrists are moving. All right. Now, take your shoulders and instead of moving your shoulders, keep them in one place. So it's only your elbows and your wrists. Okay. Now stop doing your elbows and just do your radial ulnar. And look what happens in the United States. And the second part of it's a compound again. But the first part is what happened in Italy, and it's been reduced and reduced effort-wise. So I am going to stop sharing, and I have stolen a lot of your time. I'm sorry. All right, so you can ask questions. Are we together?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting, super interactive as well. We almost hit each other in the eye. We have a lot of questions in the chat. So I would just start. Like asks, are there differences between older and younger sign language users? Do older users, for example, use more of the more effortful signs, like in a age-wise?
Okay. I could only guess, but you might be able to go beyond my guesses. My guess is that older people are going to be using older forms of the signs, and that as time goes on, people are applying this drive for ease of articulation, and so they are getting rid of the things that are very effortful. That is mitigated, however, by the fact that signers, maybe they're different from speakers in terms of they tend to embrace changes. You can find signers in the Philadelphia area who use this for telephone, which is very iconic of old telephones. You never see a telephone that has two parts anymore, one for speaking and one for hearing. But even very old people are really likely to use the modern sign for telephone. Whereas my grandmother, who spoke Italian and left Italy when she was a young woman, used the word sposo for bride and groom She used very old words. She used speme for speranza. She used very old words. She held on to them. Um, of course, she wasn't any longer living in Italy. Maybe she would have given them up if she had been living in Italy, but she held on to them. There are different personalities, and there are maybe also different cultures. Signers tend to embrace new signs. That they tend to go with the flow. But that is just me making guesses and me making generalizations that I really don't have the right to be making. There are studies going on right now where people are making databases of in which they're interviewing old signers and younger signers. And you're going to have a database for comparing what's going on. There is such a study going on right now in Philadelphia. And if anybody wants to send me an email, my email is just donnajonapoli@gmail.com. Send me an email and I will put you in touch with the people who are doing that study. There is also a study going on in Brazil right now where people are interviewing old signers about their stories about what it was like to grow up deaf, and news and young signers. And so that will be a beautiful database for comparing as well. I don't know of that in Europe, but I can't believe that it's not going on in Europe. I mean, it has to be. I just am not, I am just ignorant of it.
Thank you very much. So now let's move on to the next question. And it's from Julian. And he says, I had the same shoulder injury on both sides at different times in my life, which meant 2 months immobile in a sling each time. I'm not a signer, but I can imagine that that would have been difficult. So I was wondering if signers have specific compensation strategies for articulating and or understanding in situations similar to the one I described.
And the answer is yes. But it's complicated. Okay, I have a good friend who has cerebral palsy. She is a hearing person. She is a speaking person. She has cerebral palsy and she is a quadriplegic. Okay, so she has cerebral palsy that really leaves her in many ways not able to do certain things. And when she talks, as she speaks, her speech gets harder and harder to understand. But I can still understand her. Her mother, her family, her husband. She actually wound up getting married, which was the most incredible, beautiful wedding ever. Everybody among us can understand her, but strangers can't. When she starts speaking, a stranger can understand her. But then as she gets tired, a stranger can't understand her. What happens in the in deaf communities are small communities. And when you're in a small community, people get to know the way that you sign. And they're just real smart about it. It's as though if your grandmother has really bad arthritis and her finger spelling has really deteriorated, or other things, we were going like that before. Some people can really go far and some people can only go a little bit. And you get arthritis in your shoulders and you get arthritis in your neck. All of these things can affect how you sign. People get very used to it. It's like, it's beautiful how quickly you get into the way that somebody signs. I have a friend who signs almost exclusively with one hand and almost exclusively in a box space about here. So when he's signing compare and when he's signing communicate, you just have to figure out which it is. by the context of what he's talking about. And you get used to it. Are there ways, general ways that people do it? I don't know. I would imagine that you would I would predict, based on the work I've been doing with Nathan Sanders, I would predict that what you would do is a lot of distalization. If you can't use your shoulders, you're going to be using largely your wrist, because your wrist is going to give you a lot of opportunities that your shoulder would have given you, just in a much smaller area. And I would think that that would be a general thing that signers would do. I would predict that. I haven't seen any studies of signers who have injuries. There are studies of signers who have Parkinson's disease and Parkinsonian signers. But I haven't read anything about ease of articulation with respect to them. Who knows what studies are being done right now? There, so much is going on in sign language analysis right now.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for me. And I was wondering, because when we talked about high and low effort signs, I immediately thought about abbreviations in spoken language like are not and aren't. And I was wondering if to use the higher effort variable of a sign, is it also some sort of, how do you say, polite or a formal way of speaking?
Yes.
Or can it be used like that?
Yes, you can see when you first meet someone, unless you're a young person. When I first meet a deaf person, they tend to be very, they treat me like I'm an old person, and they might sign a little bit larger. They might use all the iterations. They might engage their shoulders a lot. And as the conversation goes on, they will often start applying a lot of these different methods of reducing effort. There's a lot of studies of sociological variation in terms of race and gender. I don't know if there's a lot of studies of variation in terms of formal and informal, but it doesn't take that much to see it. So if you go online and you look at and you watch a video of someone giving a lecture in American Sign Language, giving a presentation in American Sign Language, and you watch it, they might stay pretty formal throughout. But in the question and answer session, almost invariably, they are going to shift into using methods for ease of articulation. And part of that has to do with the culture. If you are at a linguistics presentation in a spoken language, and somebody raises their hand with a question after your talk, they are very likely to say, with respect to your first point, I was wondering whether such and such, or I disagree because of such and such. That would not happen in a deaf setting. So far as I know, my experience is in a deaf setting, after the deaf person has finished their presentation, someone will stand up and say, "This was wonderful. I have been looking forward to this for the last month. When I saw that you were going to give a talk, I looked and saw that you had studied at Gallaudet, and my cousin studied at Gallaudet. Did you ever happen to meet her? Her name is Katerina," and blah, blah, blah. And now I really loved what you said. I really loved it. It made so much sense to me. But it occurred to me that maybe this other thing what's possible. Do you think it might be possible? Could we possibly discuss that? And it'll be like that. You ease into it. You establish a connection. We are connected through my cousin who went to Gallaudet, or we are connected through the fact that I once visited Pittsburgh and you're from Pittsburgh. We have a connection. I recognize you. I know you are smart. I'm honoring what you've done today. And here is my question. I don't presume to know more than you. I don't presume that you're wrong and I'm right. I'm asking and I want to be helpful. And I see us as possibly collaborating on investigating this together. It's a really different kind of thing, which I think is why in those question and answer sessions, you shift into a less formal kind of language very quickly. You don't want to distance. You're not pushing anybody aside. You're together.
Nice, thank you. Before moving on, so we wanted to ask if for you it's okay if just we do 10 minutes more. So that's
sure, no problem.
So much questions.
Yeah, I stole a lot of time from you. I'm sorry.
Already got permission to scratch some of them because they repeated themselves a bit, or like we already had overlapping themes, but there's still some more we want to ask you.
There is one interesting question, if I find it. That was that. So can there be, or is there most of the time a difference in meaning between the more and the less effort variant in a sign? For example, in your ASL example of hurry, is there a difference, for example, when you want to show that something is more urgent or something else?
Yeah, there's two things going on here, and I don't know if I can answer them. Certainly, if something is more urgent, you tend to do it faster, and that is not an iconic thing. It is a linguistic method of showing intensity. So for example, this is a sign for slow. And if you mean really slow, you do it fast. So you do the opposite of iconic. And, you know, that maybe feels faster to you than that. I don't know. I don't know. So there are ways certainly to intensify things. You can make them larger, you can make them faster. But does the reduced form, the energy, effort, reduced form, have a slightly different meaning? Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But like, for example, in America right now, there is a movement called Black Lives Matter. And and deaf people debated how to sign that. And the final decision that I think is very common today in America is Black lives, you cherish them. And you use both hands for cherish, even though you could use one hand for cherish, but you use both. And by using both, it's like saying, I'm in this. I'm completely inside it. You've got my heart. So you might even wonder if someone said Black Lives Matter. You might even wonder if they were on the fence about it. You know, well, I don't know. So I'm not sure, but I haven't seen that. So it's interesting because, like in Italian, for example, libro means book. Libretto doesn't mean little book. It means a particular kind of little book for use at an opera. And so there's a difference. La Posta is the postal service, but Il Postino is not a little whatever. It's the letter carrier. It's your postal worker. And ino is a diminutive, and etto is a diminutive, but they don't mean a little one of that. They just mean it's related to that, and it has a particular meaning. So I'm interpreting your question of, do sign languages do that? And I don't know. I know some obscene signs that I won't do for you, where you can do them full or you can do them with reduced effort. And even when you do them with reduced effort, they're just as obscene. They don't mean something less. They don't mean a slightly different sexual behavior. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if sign languages differ on this. Why shouldn't they? Spoken languages differ on it. When you add an E to something in English, John, Johnny is just a sweet, caressing way of saying John. It doesn't mean a different person from John. So.
Thank you.
Next question is of a very clinical nature, and there's actually two of them, so I'm going to connect them. And Tim asks, do sign language speakers need speech therapy if they can no longer use certain articulated injuries? And Edith asks, if a signer suffers from a stroke, how easily can they start signing again, at least basic signs, in comparison to the recovery of spoken language for hearing people?
Yeah. Okay. So when you're talking about the first question, it was rehabilitation, not for speech, but for signing. Yes. If your signing deteriorates because you've had some kind of physical problem, then probably you'll have rehabilitation, just like you would to get up and walk again, or to use your hands for anything else again. If it's just deteriorating, yeah, I'm not. I know much more about rehabilitation for signers who also speak, who get rehabilitation for their speaking. I don't know about signing that deteriorates. If you were in a deaf community and you were signing all the time, and then you went away and you weren't signing for years and you came back, I would imagine that it wouldn't take you too long to get right back into it. I don't know. I know that when people have cochlear implants, if they have any success with those cochlear implants, if they are able to make their speech such that strangers can understand them, they find that they have to have rehabilitation. They call it rehabilitation exercises every few years, because they do start to degenerate. When you are speaking, you're getting feedback from your own ears. If you're you're a person who doesn't hear and you're speaking, you're lacking that feedback. So I have a friend who told me that she watches people's faces, and when she can see that they're a little embarrassed for her, then she realizes it's time for her to go back to rehabilitation so that she can get her enunciation up again. Now, but I don't know about signers who need rehabilitation for their signing. I don't I haven't even read about that. I'm sorry.
It's no problem. Thank you for the answer. Anyways, it was really interesting. We get now the last question.
Last question, and it's from Team. Is there any research looking at the effort needed for words in relation to their importance frequency?
That's a very interesting and wonderful question. I mean, all of your questions have been wonderful. Why do I jump on this one as wonderful? Because I'd love to research it. In spoken languages, you often find anomalies. You find things that are left over from an earlier stage. So English, for example, used to have subject-verb agreement that you could hear throughout your paradigm, singular and plural, first person, second person, third person, you could hear it all. Today, you don't hear that, except in the third person, singular and plural. But you hear it a little bit in the verb for be. I am. Nobody else is am except first person singular. All the rest is are and is, but at least you have am there. Why did am stick around so much? Probably because it was used so much. That whole thing of frequency is very, very important. So our words that are signs that induce torque but are used all the time, do they resist ease of articulation to, change? Do they resist it? I don't know. I kind of hope they do, but I don't know. And it would be beautiful to look into that. Well, one problem is, how do you measure the frequency? You've got to have a huge corpus of a huge corpus that was collected for independent reasons that you can search through for all the instances of such signs, and find out how frequently they're used. And I just don't know. I don't think anybody has done such a study, but I hope that it's true that the words that do hold on are words that are really frequently used. So we don't want to mess them up.
Okay, thank you. So, just wanted to tell you there have been around 15 viewers throughout the talk, and people commented that they also participated in the signing, so it wasn't only us two.
Good. Thank you.
Talking to more than 2 people. And also we have K. David Harrison commenting, nice demonstration of torque and other forces. And yeah, that was the
Good. Okay, well, I'll teach you 2 things. This is thank you, really thank you, in American Sign Language. And this is thank you in Libras, the sign language of Brazil. One is from your mouth as though you're a speaker, but the other is from your head. I just love it. And I would like to thank you from my heart.
Thank you. No,
happy to
yeah, it was really a big honor for us to have you again here, and let's hope to meet really in person as soon as possible. And before saying each other goodbye, so I wanted to thank the student committee of the Department of Linguistics for all the job we did together in organizing this webinar series. And to thank all the people that were following us on YouTube. And we wanted to thank you for today, Julia Krebs and Reinhard Grobauer for the other talk, and all of you for accepting our invitations. Another big thank goes to the head of our department, Dietmar Röhm.
Hi,
he was there for like And he said, thanks a lot. Great talk now.
He's watching now still.
And
Is Julia around?
yeah, I think
Julia.
she should be there, I think.
Yeah.
Because
Hello.
said she was there.
There's also other students saying it was super interesting and thank you.
Yeah.
And also I forgot to tell you this, as I think I explained it in the beginning, but I will tell you again, this video stays online because you gave us the permission to do so. Thank you so much for that. And we will add subtitles, and if you want to recommend it to your friends or family, teach them about movement and sign language, then you can just send them the link.
It will stay there.
Yeah.
And and so as I said, thank you also to Professor Dietmar and Professor Julia Krebs, because they have been really super enthusiastic from the first moment when we said we wanted to organize that, and they supported us in all the process, because we at the beginning we didn't really know how to do it, and they helped us all the time long. So
yeah. And thank you, last but not least, of course.
And we just stopped the meeting now, so we say, the streaming. So we'll say bye. And from the stream. Okay.
And we're now only in WebEx.
And now you're only in WebEx.